It almost feels normal, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It is a Tuesday night. We're sitting here, at least I'm sitting here at the Oak Barrel. I've got some whiskey I'm going to drink. Andy Ty is hanging around to drink some whiskey with us, and our great friend from Scotland, Stewart Buchanan, is tuning in to tell us all about it. It almost feels normal. Welcome to another Oak Barrel Tastings. What might be one of our final exclusively virtual tastings before we move back into the hybrid world in the next few weeks. My name is Scott Fitzsimons. It is my great pleasure to welcome you along to tonight. If you haven't been able to read the title that's just above my head here, we are tasting the new releases from Benriach, which are new to Australia. They've been released elsewhere around the world, but they have finally made it to Australia. And we can talk all about shipping delays that we want tonight, but we've probably flogged that horse enough in the past 18 months, so we're going to stick to the whiskies. This is the very first iteration of drinking these whiskies. They've just landed in the country, and they're about to filter through to everywhere. So if you are lucky enough to have one of the tasting packs we sent out around the country in the past couple of weeks, you are the very first to taste this, as well as a couple of surprises. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome my good friends from Australia and from Scotland, Stu and Andy. Welcome and thank you for donating your time tonight, Andy, and your time this morning. Stewie.
Thank you, Scott. I wouldn't knock this chance back. Honestly, to get a chance for you to chat with you guys again is, that's always on my things to do list, especially half past, 9 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, I can start having a wee dram with you guys at this time. It's no problem.
So let's be honest. I mean, we're in Sydney here, so we're just coming out of the lockdown the last couple of weeks. Our friends in Melbourne, in about 36 hours, should be out of lockdown. Rest of the state is waiting for us to get our act together. You've been experiencing this for a little while there. How much do you miss us on a scale of 1 to 10, Stewie?
Do you know what? Well, very lucky. And to be honest, with launching the whole new Benriach range, what was last September, so a year past September, there's a lot of internal stuff in the lead up to that. So I think I personally have been very lucky that the Benriach launch has really kept me busy through that whole, over 18 months now, basically since I left Australia year past in March. So I have been lucky in that way. And as you say, we're getting back to some kind of normality. That was most of the whiskey world traveling again, or ambassador-wise, were in Paris 3 weeks ago. So that was most people's first step back onto a plane. And then we had London following that. And throughout the kind of rest of the year, there's some nice local stuff. So, yeah, you're right. It does feel as if we're starting to get back into some normality there. But being able to do these things is fantastic. I can still reach the whole of the world from the comfort of my armchair. But what I do miss is the adrenaline of doing it. You know, when you're bouncing around from tasting to tasting, this part of the world, this plane, this flight, that's what I do miss. So that's why I've got my nice wee car. Just go, if I need the adrenaline rush, I'll just go for a spin.
I don't think he gave you a rating between 1 and 10, though.
No, he didn't. He didn't. He ignored that part of the question, but that's all right, because as we were talking just before we went live, it's not only us that miss your bouncing around, it's also the bars of Sydney and Melbourne and Perth and Hobart that miss your bouncing around their venues. I want to do a quick shout out. We got people watching on the Facebook, on the YouTube, and at oakbarrel.com.au/live to Simon and Anka saying g'day. And coming in with the virtual hug is Adam Bizzetto. I always say the YouTube comments section is slightly weirder than the Facebook comments section. That's my general rule of comments that come through. So it's good to see Adam's tuning in from there. So let's dig straight into this. Feel free, if you didn't get a chance to get one of these packs, crack a bottle of something you got at home and have a chat. I'm going to throw to you, Andy, just first. These we've seen pictures of these bottles around the country. I'm lucky enough to be able to have had a couple in my hands. We were putting these packs together. When did these land in Australia? How long ago?
Oh, this has been a very recent, only over the last couple of months for us. So it's as new to us as the rest of Australian shores. And tonight, you highlighted this just earlier. This is the first time for all of us. So it's a very monumental occasion for us to try the new core range, the new exciting branding. I know Stu will touch on this later, but the new look being to move forward, we must first look back. And I think that's just such a key part, of not just the look and feel, but this is the first time for us too. So, I can't wait for you guys to share this with us and to have a chat. And Stu's obviously going to fill us in on all the details.
Yeah, beauty. I guess Stu, just before we dig into the first whiskey, which I promise will not be long, as you know, Stu, when we're standing in front of people hosting, you can see in their eyes when they're getting thirsty, and I can feel them through the computer sometimes going. So just like very quickly, to introduce our first whiskey, I guess my first question is, why? Like why rebrand? What is the purpose of a distillery with history like Benriach to rebrand? And is it just a cosmetic change, or is there under the hood, as to use your car reference, are there changes there as well?
Yeah, I think actually the way I try and describe it is your range, your core range, or your whole range will basically evolve as your warehouses evolve. So you can't make whiskey without these years leading up to what we're going to put into the actual bottle, and your core range should reflect all the years of work that's been happening in the warehouse. So, like we mentioned there, everything we do here is actually touching on the history and heritage laid down before us. And what I think Rachel's done here is, let's say, even try and make sense of all of that eclectic history. Because Benriach's warehouse, particularly Warehouse 13, you walk in there, and over the last 17 years, working with maybe 35, 40 different wine cask styles. Historically, we've got the Peat going back to 1970s with triple distillation through the 90s. It's almost one of the biggest larders. If you can equate it to a larder in a kitchen, it's one of the largest larders a master blender has to work with. So how can you make sense of that? And I think Rachel's done a great job where with this range, you still get the fantastic experience of almost taking a walk through that warehouse and tasting all these beautiful things we've done throughout these years, but just make it more concise and get that really distinct nature of what Benriach has done in the past and what we'll continue to do in the future. So making sense of that larder, let's say, was the main objective.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, we're probably going to assume a little bit of knowledge about Benriach and about whiskey tonight, but feel free, if there's any questions you want to ask, chuck them in the chat and we can look at them. But I know it's 9:10 where you are, Stewie, but it's 7:10 where we are, and I haven't had a drink yet, so I think it's about time. So I'm going to take a guess, and maybe the original 10 is where we should kick off tonight.
Exactly. That's the way to start. And I think as well, looking at the 10, the reason that you've got sometimes as well, just you guys out there, think about this for a second. Never look at one whiskey and it's individually. Look at the whole core range of a distillery and see what maybe part each expression plays. And I think if I was to look at and see what part the original 10 is playing, that's going to give us the focus of the distillery. This will let you know everything that Benriach holds, and we're really going to show that to its best. So this is the DNA of the distillery. This is a starting point where, as we go through the rest of the range, we can start bringing different casks together, different secondary maturation together to build these layers of flavour. But here you're going to get Benriach. And I didn't pour this earlier because what I love doing, even when I pop the cork in this bottle, I don't even have to put this to my nose. Even just opening that bottle, if I was maybe more technical savvy, I would put some emojis of apples and pears and honeycombs coming out of this bottle, because that's exactly what I get even when I just pop the cork in this. So even there, you'll know the Benriach DNA, let's say. It's hugely orchard fruit led, hugely easy drinking, and these just layers of honey, toasted oak, apples, pears. It's just such an easy drinking classic Speyside style, and that's where we're going to start right here.
I'll do a quick shout out. I know you couldn't do the apples and pears thing, but thankfully Adam has provided us in the YouTube chat with apples and pears, and we will get you back eventually into the oak barrel. And I expect you couldn't do it virtually, but I expect to see one of those magic tricks, where you've got it up your sleeve as you open the bottle. I want to see apples and pears fall onto the ground magically. You've got a year to sort that out.
I'll try and work on that. But Indy's got the glass there. You have to put it to your nose. It's just so open, so fresh. Again, we can look at the colours we normally do. You've got that lovely, almost kind of summer gold there. Benriach, Speyside, it's always blue skies and sunshine here. So that's going to reflect in that lovely summery nature of Speyside. Again, you can roll it around. You can see that viscosity. One thing I was really taken aback by with the new range of Benriachs is almost that additional viscosity in the whiskey. I'd never seen such legs in any of the Benriachs before. So Rachel's combinations have really taken let's say a richer mouthfeel, I think, from where we were in the past. And that's maybe just with age, with time, and with combination. But if I was to put a comparison of where the 10 was before and where the 10 is now, it's almost like these orchard fruits have ripened. So maybe before we talked about more green apples, a little more citrusy kick off that. Here now, the apple and pear has just ripened. So we've letting that that sweeter element come through. Beautiful cask combination in here. So as we've always done, Benriach using the warehouses with many different cask styles, we've always tried to create these layers of flavour. So just to touch on, I keep getting this wave of apple and pear and cream. It's like apple crumble. Absolutely beautiful. 3 casks in here. And what I want you guys to do as well is try and almost unlock the layers. Always deconstruct it as you taste it. And as much as I'll tell you the cask, but you can try and identify where they come in, why they're there, and what they're bringing as far as a compliment to the dram itself. So here we go, guys. I know it's been a while. 10 minutes waiting, but Slanjavan.
Cheers. So, I mean, it is so vibrant, so aromatic in the way it sort of expresses itself. We're sitting at 43% here, and I think that sort of helps. I am very, very familiar with the previous 10-year-old, and obviously in Australia, everything happens in terms of whiskey about 12 months later than everything else. So up until a month ago, I was drinking the old 10. From your point of view, was there a development? How was this different to, and what, like, is there any difference between this and the old one?
It's hard to tell. It's the same cask combination, but again, you've got to look at ratios. It's Rachel's own putting her own identity in it, with her, maybe pushing one cask further than the other. But what I do see is, which I think is the fun part of Benriach, is you really can taste the development of flavors. You can deconstruct it. So even for somebody maybe who's maybe not that whiskey savvy, when we start talking about the cask, they go, yeah, oh great, I get that, I get this, I can get this, I can see where this is coming in. So I think the construction of it is absolutely fantastically balanced, but still being able to unlock these classic flavors. So we've got 3 casks in here. Again, as you say as well, just to touch on the strength, 43 ABV. I do think that helps even make this juicier. So that little bit of reduction will make that orchard fruit slightly sweeter, softer, make it more juicier. I bet you everybody out there is tasting just now is actually salivating as they have this in their mouth. It's got that lovely mouth-watering freshness to it, and that even alone is a fantastic, facet in the expression itself. So we've got 3 casks, bourbon barrels. Now, what are the bourbon? What's the purpose of the bourbon barrel? Bourbon barrel in Benriach. Remember, we're talking about the DNA of Benriach. Benriach loves American oak. In the new make spirit, you've got already vanillas, you've already that lovely apple, pear, honey notes, and the sweet barley also. You can't forget about the barley note running through. It's always there. So Benriach loves that foundation in American oak. They're similar characters. We're going to get the toasted element from the oak. We're going to get the char nature of the cask itself. You're going to get that lovely vanillins, as we always talk about, coconuts, toffees. So that base, the foundation of this whiskey is that ex-American oak. Now that's beautiful, and we can taste that. It's very evident in the nose and the palate. But how do we build vibrancy in there? Because Benriach is a very sweet new make spirit. We need to actually use the warehouse, use some wood to create that buzz in the middle. And that's when we're now starting to layer in some new oak, some virgin oak. And that new oak, the virgin oak, slowly toasted, some medium char, medium toast, that almost caramelizes the classic Benriach notes and then adds that lovely zingy spice, let's say, in the middle of the palate. So we've gone from the sweet apples and pears and custardy notes of the bourbon barrels, then bringing in the virgin oak to give us that crisp nature, that bit of pizzazz in the middle. And then there's another cask in the back, which is sherry. So before I talk about the sherry, I'm sure you get that, Scott and Andy there. You can see that foundation already starting to build.
Yeah, 100%. I want to do another quick couple of shout-outs to Whiskies, my jam, watching in. Someone who we might be reasonably familiar with, Seamus, says hello. G'day from wherever he is in the world at the moment. And Simon McGorham coming in with tasting notes here. For me, this is warm porridge drizzled with honey and a generous spoonful of stewed apples. which gets the thumbs up, and Simon's officially thrown the gauntlet down for best tasting note of the night. So I don't know what the prize is, haven't worked that out, but the gauntlet's on the floor somewhere.
Well, do you know what? Seeing Simon's comments there, that's everything Benriach does in a nutshell. And that's actually even touching on some production notes. That, again, I'll maybe talk about production later on, but everything we do in production is driving that sweetness. It's driving that apple and pear and orchard fruit. It's even driving that barley note, the porridge, for example, there. We want that barley to be prominent. We want that barley to show in the bottle as well. Because why do it in production? Why emphasize it in production if we're not going to taste it in the glass? So I think that's magic, Simon. Really bang on with that.
That's a beautiful description. And for someone that's actually done that whiskey and porridge in the morning with me in Tasmania, it actually rings very true. It's a beautiful way to start the day in that warm, comforting apple and cinnamon combination. You can't beat it.
It's in there. It is. So I did talk about the other cask, the third cask we're using. Now, if you look at the label, which we're, again, looking at the range of the new label, we have got a very, let's say, transparent kind of description here. So it will give you your cask details. It'll tell you the cask inclusions. It'll give you the strength, obviously. But what you might see here, it says bourbon casks. It talks about virgin oak casks, but it also says sherry casks. Now, you might then ask the question, well, what sherry is it? In our warehouses, we do only use Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez sherry. So I can even ask you guys here, if you think about the word even on the label, just saying sherry, which sherry do you think is the prominent sherry that Rachel's using out of the Oloroso or the PX? So fire that in the comments if you've got any idea of how that maybe comes across in the palate.
That's a really interesting sort of point there, Stu. I mean, for so long we've spoken about sherry casks just being sherry casks. And then, there was this consumer interest to figure out the difference between Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso, and then Fino and Montellado and those sorts of things. And then is the sherry cask in European oak or in American oak and that sort of thing? I mean, how much weight and impact do you put on the type of oak that sherry casks go into? And does the Benriach warehouses have a bit of a mix of sherry in different types of oak?
Purely Oloroso and PX. If you went back historically, you might find some Finos back in the 70s, some refill Olorosos back in the 70s. But what I do know, even looking at the cask structure, and you can even cut the cask or chisel it to feel the wood and see how it cuts, or even cut it with a saw to see the density of the wood. So sometimes people think, well, I'm crazy when they see me out the back, like chopping up staves. They think it's maybe for my fire at home, but it's not. It's actually, sometimes you can determine the wood from that. American oak, more dense, harder structure. European oak, slightly softer. Spanish oak is a lot softer. So you can actually, once you get used to cutting different oaks, you can tell which oak it is just by taking a saw, taking a knife, and feeling that structure of it. But you're right as well. If you went back even 10 years ago, sherry was just sherry. The word sherry came in and it's a sherry cask. It's only in the last 10, 15 years where people have started to, drive for that, elevated knowledge of, well, what is sherry, first of all, and then what else can the sherry cask bring in wood, in styles. Benriach only holds Oloroso and PX today. It's all Spanish oak. But going back to even this one, if you think about what we're trying to achieve here, trying to look at maintaining the distillery's character, again, I'll open this up as well, but you would not want to drown this with Pedro Jimenez sherry. Pedro Jimenez sherry is going to start bringing in the really dark, almost pruny dates, the dark chocolates, all these darker flavors. Whereas in here, we want to remain bright. We want it to remain fresh. So even I'll just give you the answer here. The sherry predominantly Rachel's going to use in here will be Oloroso.
I was just about to say that as well. I was just 2 seconds away from saying that.
Yeah. But I think that's another added interest to how I love talking about even this new range. It's not just, there's more to it than just saying sherry. There's reasons behind why we use Oloroso predominantly. Rachel will sneak in a little bit of PX, to find some balance, maybe accelerate more sweetness or richness in palate or length. But the predominant sherry is Oloroso. Oloroso, we're going to keep that nuttiness, we're going to keep that spice even. But also the funny thing that the Oloroso protects is the barley. Because you've got to remember, they're big 500-litre casks. We're using a range of whiskey between maybe 10 and 12 years old in this one. the sherry's not going to be the biggest element from that Oloroso cask. It's going to maintain the oak. It's going to maintain even the barley character in there due to the wood to spirit ratio. So lovely wee things to touch on when you bring this together. And that, I think the Oloroso just appears at the back. It's just that little bit of drying, little bit of earthiness, and that little bit of barley that you get at the back palate after all that apples, pears, virgin oak spice, toasted oak, and then back to the Oloroso again.
When you were speaking about the before we go into sherry, we were talking about the apple notes and the pear notes coming through. I remember you talking about the minerality of the water and its progression through to fermentation and distillation with the pear-shaped stills making pear flavors. It was really interesting to hear you talk about how Rachel Barry is sort of from beginning, from the barley and the water source through to fermentation and distillation. She's harnessing those fruity esters. And I found that really fascinating about every step of the way to really harness that fruit and bring it forward.
It is. I think that's where Benriach, I think I've always talked about production. I come from a production background. And even back before maybe people were maybe putting a lot of production detail into tastings, I always led with the reasoning why the spirit is the way it is, through the 4 watering mash, the high minerality. People say there's a great debate, is water important? Does water have an influence on the whiskey? Well, it does if you can actually tweak your production to take advantage of that high minerality of the water. And it is definitely in the fermentation stage where you do get that reaction with how the yeast kind of munches away and converts the alcohol and populates. It really does give you more of these esters, these fruit esters in our wash, along with the additional long fermentation times. I can go on and on. You go into the stills, beautiful pear-shaped stills. They're medium in size. They're actually relatively narrow. So one of the best things I think about is we run them very slowly. So think about how a still works. That evaporating spirit come off. It's going to be the higher volatile alcohols we're going to reap off rather than burn, a fast rolling boil that's going to bring over some other influences. So even the rate we run our stills is taking advantage of these more high ester volatile alcohols. And then the middle cut, we've got one of the biggest middle cuts in Speyside, 30 minutes, 4 shots, a long middle cut going right down to 60.5. So we're getting all the big fruits at the start of that cut and all the rich barley at the back of that cut. So we've got a bigger window of opportunity to collect these beautiful flavors. So that's a whistle-stop tour through the production. But even at that point, you can see how there's always a continual drive for exactly what we've got in this glass. Orchard fruits and barley. Then the cask comes in and enhances that.
I've always said because of that, Benriach has a big heart. It's got a bigger heart than a lot of other distilleries in Scotland, and everyone's welcome into Benriach, and that goes for production as well. And Peat is welcome into Benriach and has been here historically, which might be a good segue into our second whiskey, which may not be exactly how some people would have done tastings like this before, but we're going to jump straight into, I guess, essentially the sister release of the 10 we've just tried with the Smoky 10. Is that right, Stewie?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's play about a little bit because I always like putting these 2 10s together, just so you can see that contrast of the smoky and the original. And actually, after we have this one, we can look at some questions, just refresh our palate. It's not going to deter from your palate for the next whiskey, even having the peat in the Smoky 10. So don't be afraid your palate's going to be wrecked. I'm sure you've all got some water there. Just give it a wee refresh. So this Smoky 10, if anybody remembers the Curiosities of the past, which was always my favourite of the core range, this is, again, how your warehouses evolve, your core range evolves. This is almost the evolution of that combination, which used to be the Curiosities. And we are using that beautiful Northeast Highland peat, to smoke that and dry that barley. So I know that sometimes peated whiskies aren't for everybody. Sometimes you maybe think a peated whiskey and you'll run for the hills. You're going to think of the big islas that maybe you're not so comfortable with. But what I love about Benriach, it's an extremely approachable peat. The smoke level in here, and you can see it on the label itself. We will not give you a number. We can touch on that if you want, Scott. We will not give you a number of a ppm of this spirit. We'll actually let you know how it's going to come across in the palate. So on the palate, Rachel's put a descriptor on this as rich. I believe it is. My eyes are terrible, but I think we're going rich on this one. So that rich peat, that's what she's wanted to express in the palate. A number means nothing. I don't know if you want to add in a wee comment on that, Scott.
No, I think it's great. I think people get hung up on ppm sometimes, but then it opens up a bit of a wormhole of at what point ppm, and can anyone really tell between 2 ppm and 4 ppm? I'm all about flavour and transparency. I'm all for, but flavour is the be all and end all. Now, I loved the 10-year-old Curiositas as well. Over barbecue, honey smoked ham, ribs. That was the ultimate whiskey for that situation. This is obviously looking a little bit different. It's got a new name. It's got a new label. Is the DNA the same inside the bottle?
Yeah. If you go back to the Curiositas, it had evolved as the warehouse evolved as well, because at first it was just second fill bourbon, some hogsheads, and then it developed to using some virgin oak. Then it developed to using some rum. But what Rachel's done is go into the warehouse now and basically take that same recipe now, using the bourbon barrels, the virgin oak, and the rum casks. But what I feel here is she's more elevated the rum. Maybe in the old 10, which did contain rum, it wasn't so evident. It just added to the fruit notes. But I think in this one, she's definitely elevated how the rum is coming across in it, which is going to, again, take that apple and pear and change it, let's say, into more exotic fruits. So every time we go through the range, think about that third cask, the second maturation. That's going to be the one that's going to take the DNA of the 10 original, then tweak it into something else, move it into another direction. So that's the purpose of that 3 cask combination. Every third cask, every secondary maturation is going to take that fruit and just move it in a different way. We are getting up in strength here, 46 ABV, which is again beautiful for that nose. I don't know if anybody's nosing it out there with me, but you might think, Stuart just said this was described as rich, but on the nose, where's the richness? But that's the amazing thing about the Highland Peat. I always say that Northeast Highland Peat, it always hides in the nose. So the nose is quite deceiving. And this is another thing I do with this. It's like you've got to put it in a context of distance rather than numbers. When you nose this, think of the barbecue, think of a campfire, think of a fire pit in your garden. Is that fire pit in your garden, your neighbour's garden? Is it down the block? How far away is that fire that you're smelling that smoke from? When I smell this, when I get in the nose of that smoke, yeah, that fire's maybe 10 doors away. It's distant. It's more distant smoke just wafting into my garden.
But is it a easterly or a westerly blowing on the time at the day?
A bit more of a westerly.
Okay.
I'm south facing, so I can catch both.
Simon's just made he's made a very interesting point on this whiskey. This starts to head into more tropical territory with the fruit, grilled lemon and pineapple, allspice, grilled meats, jerk spice, perhaps. Like that, definitely on that charred pineapple was one of the first things I smelt in the glass, along with that, that 10 doors down peated smoke. Definitely loads of pineapple.
It's like taking that fresh pineapple, it's covering it in maple syrup and flashing it in the grill, charring and searing that flesh. That's what I get, and that's that beautiful introduction of the rum. Now, you mentioned earlier, Andy, about the kind of esters. Now, esters are things we build in the fermentation stage. Esterification is something that happens in cask, but also if you think, and Benriach is we're taking advantage of all these esters to bring us the fruits. So, what rum are we going to choose? We're going to go to the Caribbean. We're going to go to Jamaica and pick a high ester rum. So the high ester rums that we're using actually match very well with the high ester notes in the new make spirit. So again, you're always looking at that synergy between spirit and cask. And there, as you say, you think about even black overripe bananas, the pineapple, just starting to move that into the more exotic notes there. And then the smoke, on the taste of this, think of even counting seconds when it comes to the taste. Just not think about any flavours. Just think about how that smoke comes in. For me, probably 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds, depending on what day it is. Saying that it's 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, it might go in a bit quicker. But here we go. Just now, boom. Think about how that smoke interacts. You take it in your tongue, just at the front of your palate, you do get this beautiful fruit. It seems sweeter, even at the higher ABV. You've instantly got a riper nature of that fruit. You do still get then that lovely little pizzazz, that zinginess in your tongue. So this is 1, 2, 3, boom, 4. Then that smoke comes in, and it doesn't come in and overwhelm. It comes in, rolls to the back of the tongue. Just okay. Now that smoke is in your garden. It's on your palate. It's just rolling your palate. It doesn't overwhelm. It then lets the other things come through. More of that ripe fruits, more of that vanilla, more of that even lovely virgin oak, toasted oak notes that's in there. But also in the back, it's going to go right back to that barley. So even though we've got some beautiful cask combinations in here, as well as that, what is a high level ppm peat at the start, peated barley at the start, we can still taste the barley. It's not overwhelmed at all. So again, beautiful, deconstruct it step by step, cask by cask, layer by layer. What a beautiful dram.
I have to say, like, I agree wholeheartedly in what you were saying at the start, where in the nose, the smoke is a little bit shy, and then you get it on the back palate. The time I enjoyed this the most in the past 5 minutes or so was after that first sip, going back and nosing again. If you got that lingering smoke and then that tropical fruit comes back. I adore this nose. It's technically a whiskey I should be quite familiar with, but it's showing so many different dimensions this time around, and it's maybe the evolution, but I just find that nose like incredibly alluring and enticing, and it drags you in, and I don't know, like maybe I expected high, but like this is maybe I haven't drunk enough today already, but this is really, really good. Like I didn't think it was going to be. I knew it was going to be good, but I'm actually enjoying this more than I expected to, if that makes sense. And I had high anticipations.
I know, and I've got a lot of work to do today, but I'm being careful here. But you're right, and also it does open people's eyes and to what maybe that Highland peat is, what that northeast peat is, because it's not the Islas, it's not the medicinal. People actually are amazed when they taste this for the first time. I didn't realise, a peated whiskey, a smoky whiskey, could be so sweet and so balanced. I think it's lovely. And the word that I use for this a lot, or even a lot of the Benriach peat, is that moorish element to it. Because you take one glass of it, you think, God, that was unusual. That was, I have another glass. Then you finish that one, so I have another glass. So your bottle doesn't last long. If you're sitting with 4 or 5 friends, this bottle's full with cork, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Moorish, if that's the way you want to describe it. In Australia, we describe it as smashable, is the Australian vernacular for that. But just like I don't know if it's the peat, but it's so well integrated as well. I find, and maybe it's just been my habits recently. I've been drinking a lot of challenging whiskies that have sharp edges and really make you work for it. And that's a fun exercise in itself. But this is it for me. It doesn't need any water. It's at 46. It's near perfect. It's I'm a big fan of this.
I wouldn't put any water in that. I think it's tempting to put a little bit of water in it to see what it exposes. Maybe in the nose it'll pull that fire closer to you. Maybe it'll bring that peat maybe in a different way. It'll maybe expose more of barley notes of the smoke and the peat. But for me, I just love it exactly the way it is. And you got to remember as well, that salivation, your mouth is watering when you taste Benriach, and that salivation that's happening will naturally reduce it as well. So that's the way I love to drink it. But again, the peat, I've got a bit of peat here, and just to show you that, but I'm sure people have seen this before, but look at the structure of this northeast peat. It's far more fibrous. So basically this is what, I don't know if you can see that there. It's actually starting to molt a little bit, but there's fantastic root compounds in here, bits of bark, bits of twigs, bits of sticks even. This is not maybe the moss structure or the seaweed structure or low-lying herbaceous shrubs of the West Coast. This is actually deadfall and windfall of the Caledonian pine forest. So this is trees. So what do you get in trees? You get, or wood, if you even go back to casks. Oak casks, we talk about vanillins. Wood, any wood is going to contain vanillins. So actually what we're going to taste here is that sweeter vanillins from 1,000-year-old trees, 2,000-year-old trees, that's going to make this peat a more comfortable level and just emphasize more of that smoke rather than what we would associate with peat. If I was to burn this, honest to goodness, and I do this for the visitor centre, I make small peat vials up with some peat oil that I can extract from this. It tastes like applewood smoke. That's the best equivalent if you were to burn on your barbecue, looking at smoking something. Applewood is the best flavour I could probably describe for this northeast Highland peat.
Do you do that at the distillery? Do you sort of light some peat on fire and give them the smell? Because I asked that because there is a distillery that shall not be named that when I first visited about 10 years ago sold little take-home peat, like I forget what they called them, but you could sort of burn them when you got back to wherever you were going, and it would give you the essence of this particular region in your home. And all it did was set off my fire alarm repeatedly over the next course of
Yeah.
6 months every time I tried to have a dram. So
Yeah, I've got a bar smoker that I use. Sometimes I used to use, but yeah, you're right. Having the smoke is quite difficult. But you should have seen me. One of my lockdown projects was how do I extract the oils from peat at home. So you should have smelt my kitchen. It was, but what I was able to do by actually almost like making charcoal, when you remove, the oils from the peat, you can actually then get the oil residue. So we used to actually, what I'll do is I'll put that oil residue along with some of the fibrous nature of the peat in a small test tube, and they have that as one of the sensory aspects in the distillery tasting. So you can actually get the oils is the better way to keep that, again, aroma. So yeah, it took a bit of practicing, but I got there. It's quite fun.
yeah.
Out of curiosity, Stewart, just when I suppose before we move on to the 12-year, the new labels. You've got a beautiful bottle sitting next to you, I believe, or somewhere in the room that sort of give us an idea of the heritage and the throwback and the inspiration behind the new labels. Can we talk about that?
I will indeed. So that's, as you can see, the Smoky 10 label there, but you want to look even just at that original 10. As we say, this should give you that whole DNA, history, heritage, everything that's laid down before us. Look at that beautiful duck egg blue colour, the bolder font, the red highlights and hues. Where did we get the inspiration of that? Now, I don't have actually the bottle, the outer tube with me, because I lost that in a tasting elsewhere. But I've got the bottle of what was the first Benriach distillery own bottling that was produced back in the 1990s by Seagram's. So hopefully here you can see how we've taken that duck egg blue, we've taken these red highlights and hues, and maybe going back to that bolder font. So we'll look back to that and brought that into the modern day shelf space. So really touching on that history and heritage. But the funny thing is, Rachel Barry was aware of this whiskey, in her days, even before she joined us. So she actually did use this in some ways to try and reimagine this whiskey in flavour and in palate and bring it into the new range. So this was not, it wasn't an example she was trying to follow exactly, but she was taking the cues from this and seeing how she could add layers to it and ripen what's in here. The funny thing, which I didn't mention, but I'll mention it now, what she found in here was a little trace of that smoke. Now, it's not evident, maybe in the nose, it's not evident in the front of the palate, but if you let this whiskey open up, or even you add a little bit of water, you'll start with this lovely sweet wood smoke running through the back of it, along with that barley note at the back of the palate. So what did she do when she brought the 10 together? The original 10? She did the same thing. So if you look at this label here again, and look at the smoke level, it says trace. Now, I like leaving that comment to later, because if I said it when you were tasting it, you might say, yes, I got smoke. But thinking back when you tasted that 10, did MD get any smoke? I don't, to be honest. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Today I didn't. But if I'm to leave that whiskey to open up in the glass, or I'd say maybe add a little bit of water in, I'll maybe find this trace of smoke running through the back. So not only is Rachel using the 3 cask combination, she's taking a little bit of smoky whiskey, sneaking that in there just to get that other layer. But what does happen, which is an interesting thing as well, when you add maybe one thing, sometimes in the whiskey you get another. That's also possibly a reason why this is riper or more honey notes coming through it. We did seem to find that adding that little trace of smoke running through this will elevate that honey and maybe ripen that orchard fruit. Interesting wee twist on it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and that's why people like Rachel and equivalents in other distilleries get paid the big bucks, because they're sensed to be able to pick that and then realize it's happening and react and sort of work with that is far superior to anything I can certainly do, and I think it's quite a skill. I just want to mention a comment that I popped up from Matt Bailey. Reckons the new labels look ace, no nonsense, clean, and keep the focus on the liquid. And I think I'd like to agree and sort of echo that. We've seen a lot, as I'm sure between the three of us here, we've seen a lot of rebrands over the past 10, 15 years from various distilleries. And sometimes they hit and miss. And I actually think, Benriach was in its previous iteration was a little bit scattergun. They were gloss, and then they were matte, and then they were this color, then they were all the colors, and they're all one color. And you could see them on a bar, and then you couldn't see them on a bar, and then all this sort of stuff. So I think it's a bit of a testament. It's probably one of the best examples I've seen from a pure design point of view. And I know you can't drink labels, but these are works of art, so it's always nice to have a nice bottle to look at while you're drinking. Finding that balance between tradition and progressiveness and transparency and that. So I know it probably wasn't you, Stewie, sitting there and do that, but you're here, so you can take the glory for that one.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Scott. And I think it works, and I was so happy to see it. Again, I was always, even going back to 10 years ago, I'd always had that old bottle myself in mind. And it was always a aspiration that I thought, could we do something with this? Not as we've realised it today, but I always had that in the back of my mind that would be a direction it would be great to go down. And also, when you look at the range itself, the colours, it's almost like a very pastel colour range. So even the pastel colours of each expression reflects the Speyside landscape. So you've got that blues, the duck-eyed blues, referring back to this one. You can look at the blues also being the Speyside River itself. You've got the colour of the heather, which is purple, in the autumn, which is the other expression. So you've got this kind of connection to the landscape of Speyside across the range as well. So it's beautiful. And again, makes sense of it. It really does make sense of Benriach in a very concise way. Rather than having 35 different expressions, we can tell the same story in 4 or 5. That's what I like.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent segue into our third whiskey. It's amazing how I've had drinks with both Stewie and Andy, with a few drinks with you over the years, and never once have we sat here for 43 minutes and only had 2 drams in this time. But when we get on talking about it, we seem to get carried away with the stories and stuff. So let's crack into what is essentially the final of the newer whiskies, at least to reach Australia so far. The 12 there, which I think you've got in your hands, Stewie.
Yep. There we go.
Oh, that was a beautiful sound.
A festive sound indeed.
So again, 12. Do you remember our names before? We had Aromaticus Famosus, Importanticus Famosus, all these Harry Potter names, as people call them.
I learnt Latin purely to understand them, and now it's absolutely useless to me.
So we go, again, we're stripping right back. It's the 12. There we go. What is this? It's the 12. But still, beautiful cask combination. Of course, we're moving 2 years older in style. Maybe you'll see even in colour, we're moving into that more autumnal, coppery, dark copper hues. So even in your head, you can start maybe imagining that casks are getting different in combination. So beautiful cask combination again here. We're looking, bringing some of my favourite styles of cask together. We have got the sherry. We've got American oak, bourbon, ex-bourbon, but we've also got some beautiful port casks in here. So the 3 casks, sherry, bourbon, and port. Now, let's go back to even how we talked about the 10. You know this? Which one is the foundation this time? Which is the foundation cask? With the 10-year-old, it was the bourbon that was that foundation, and then we built on that. What I get, particularly here now, on the nose, far more chocolates, far more mocha notes, almost far more orange, and a lot of cherry. That's cherry with a CH, not an SH. So that's the 3 things I find here: the chocolate, the orange, and the cherry. So what is that coming from? Let's say this time then, the basis, the foundation is the sherry casks. We can ask the same question: which sherry? Oloroso or Pedro Jimenez? I'll just be quick on this and say, well, the foundation is predominantly Pedro Jimenez, because we're talking about that sweeter note coming through. So that's what we're looking for, that lovely PX base. And then we can this time build on that.
There's almost this really beautiful sort of fudge caramel flavor that comes through on this one as well. Not just on the nose, but part of the body that comes through. I just get loads of fudge.
Yeah, it is.
It smells chewy, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
It doesn't, but thank you for just humouring me for a second there.
It makes sense to me.
But even remember, it's 46 ABV, same as the last one, but this time there's not that. you can maybe evidently see now how we use the virgin oak to create that pop in the middle. We're not using the virgin oak this time, so it's smoother, it's creamier, it's got that more rounded balance to it. Again, looking at the more fortified wine styles in here. There is
Adam's
silver
agreeing
bourbon
there.
barrels in here. There's still a foundation of, well, still not a foundation of bourbon, still a bourbon element in here because we don't want to lose that Benriach DNA. So the bourbon casks in here are almost holding back the sherry and the port cask, saying, look, I'm still Benriach, I'm still Speyside. I want to be fresh. I want to be, fruity. So the bourbon element is there just to hold back the heavyweight notes of the other fortified wines. And then if you look at what the sherry's doing, probably comes in the middle. That's going to give us more... I think that's where the cherry comes from. That lovely red kind of cherry notes in there. You'll definitely elevate that fruit from, again, apples, or normally what you would talk about with sherry would be your raisins and dates. It's actually elevated that further to this lovely maraschino cherries, red glassy cherries, all that beautiful note, which work great along with that chocolate and orange. Another great thing, if I just talk about the port again, they're ruby port pipes predominantly. The largest cask we use in the industry, at Benriach anyway. So a fantastic large wood, a lot of wood in that cask. So there's not only the introduction of the port influences, the fruits that then change through the port influence, you're also getting some lovely spices from the wood. So you're almost getting a little grinding of black pepper from that oak in the port cask due to its size and spirit to wood ratio. It does,
almost a Black Forest cake note to this.
Yeah. Black Forest Gateau in a glass. That's what I would say.
I want to shout out to Simon, who said lots of edge of the roasting pan goodness. If there was any doubt as to what Simon's been doing during lockdown, I think we've figured it out. I'm going to echo what I said before in that sort of perfectly balanced. You don't need to add anything super alluring, very, very Moorish, but in a completely different way to what particularly the Smoky Ten was for me. The Smoky Ten almost had that sort of like menthol alluring element to it underneath that honey, that Manuka honey thing that was coming on. But this is, as you say, like dark forest cake.
Yeah. And how easy, they're all easy to drink. The thing is, they're not scary whiskies. Sometimes you can be sitting back and you be trying to find, what's this? Is it, is my palate getting this? Is my nose able to get this? What I love about Benriach is its approachability by even people who haven't drank single malt coming to the first time. They're not scary flavors. There should be, flavors and, characters that we all recognize. That instantly gives you a kind of comfort level to say, okay, yeah, I get this, and you can enjoy it even more without being confused in the palate.
But just on that, Stuart, and I think anyone who's trying this will agree, these aren't simple whiskies. These are layered and complex whiskies. There's still a lot to pick apart and decipher.
Yeah.
But you just don't have to work to get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's the joy of it. It's not a scary whiskey; it's a comfortable whiskey, and it really does show you how we're building these whiskies. But as you said as well, the integration of the casks, the word that we'll use, every master blender will use, age doesn't matter, style doesn't matter, cask doesn't matter, as long as you've got balance. Balance. That's subjective of a master blender. And I think we've nailed it here in each one of these. The balance between the cask, whether it's the smoke, the length, the fruits, the balance is for me the most outstanding thing.
Yeah. One thing I do want to touch on while we're talking about these whiskies in particular is that they're just in the country. We're lucky enough to have received a delivery about 2 hours ago before we went live. So we're cutting it fine. Being the first in the country to really have a go at these means I'm the first to price them. So I might be the cheapest in the country. I might be the most expensive in the country. We don't know until a week till everyone knows. Chances are what will happen is everyone else will see it and undercut me by $1. But just to put these things in perspective, for the Oak Barrel members price, we're talking about sort of $76 for the 10, 85 for the Smoky 10, and 87 for this one, which I think and we'll all agree as whiskey consumers and whiskey lovers, whiskey is not a cheap hobby and hasn't been for a very long time. That provides exceptional value to the consumer in terms of what what we get in the glass. So, I hate talking about price when it comes to whiskey. You should try whiskey in isolation. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Whatever, and then worry about price later. So I kind of hate to bring it in, but it is worth pointing out in this situation because it is exceptional value in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's sort of going back to the launch. We've that's like over a year now in the market, and it's been overwhelming the response in the market. And one of the main comments is value for money. What people are getting, it's made to be opened. It's made to be drank with friends. It's a whiskey that you can happily open. You don't have to say, "Oh, can I have this brand?" Open it. Once you open that bottle, you fall in love with it, and you go back and buy another one. That's the main objective.
Yeah. And if other people come in and undercut me by $1 or $2, we're going to offer free shipping anywhere in Australia for the first 24 hours until I remember to turn it off. That's my
take
sales
advantage
pitch
of that. Absolutely.
That's my sales pitch done. Let's get back to enjoying ourselves. Softer when the whiskeys speak for themselves, makes my job very easy. The softer sell. So I mean, these are the three that are in Australia at the moment. There are others that'll start to filter through in the next months and next year and all that sort of stuff. But just Stu, to sort of wrap this up a little bit from these new releases. Obviously, you'll start to get the feedback in the next couple of months from Australia, but these have been out for 12, 13 months. What has the reaction been outside of the value proposition? Has there been one that people are falling in love with, or is every tasting you do a different winner? Like, what's the reaction globally been to these releases?
That was the interesting thing about being able to get back in front of people and engage that extremely even across the board. I think people, especially the Smoky 10, for example, people who would not normally go to a peated whiskey, but then find that an extremely balanced, style for their palate. Great feedback on it, but generally across the board, each one of them has been extremely even in response. So, I think we've done a good job there. That's testament to how solid each and every one of them are.
Yeah, and I know full well that I'm with the global ambassador and the Australian ambassador here, or one of the Australian ambassadors here.
Yeah.
So you've got to be polite and say, "Oh, I love them all equally." But I'm going to put you on the spot. You got 3 seconds to pick your favourite out of the top 3 first impressions. Here we go. I'm going to kick off my first run through, and I didn't try any of these till then. The Smoky 10 is my pick. Andy, if you had to drink one for the rest of your life?
It's the 12 for me. The 12 is absolutely my favourite of these three.
Smoky 10.
And there he is.
Smoky 10, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Hits all my buttons.
Awesome. Well, look.
The underdog.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, look, we've still got a few more whiskies to drink, so let's keep rolling and have a little bit of fun. Let's move on to a whiskey that is on its last legs, and we're sort of dipping into the very last stocks in Australia in the warehouse for what we're going to call the old label 21. If you've got one of the tasting packs at home, you'll notice it's got the old font on it as well.
Yeah.
But we were saying some of the last stocks in Australia, but because everything happens about 12 months later in Australia, Stewie, these must be some of the last stocks globally for this release or this label.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that, Scott, because we do have the new range of 21s, 25, and 30. That's the new premium old and rare whiskies there. But we didn't want to move them into the different markets until they had depleted through. So almost across Europe, everywhere is depleted now. The US also, and Asia. So you guys, you may well be one of the last to hold some of this old label stock there. But also talk about evolution of your warehouses. This shows you that we didn't have a 21 for a while. We had a 20, which was the original core Benriach range back, 10, 15 years ago. And as the warehouse evolved, that combination started to change as the warehouse had changed. And what we came here to in the 21 was a beautiful 4-cask combination, bringing in and elevating again all the facets we're looking for in Benriach. So there was the bourbon, there was the virgin oak, touch of sherry, and also some red wine, which was a little sneaky secondary maturation that came in there just to take that fruit and tweak it into a different direction. Back in the day, I used to do that was part of my job, was doing all the tasting notes for these. And that when I noticed that, the first thing I got was almost that beautiful breakfast time for me again. So we talk about breakfast jam and toast. This is like strawberry jam.
Maybe you shouldn't talk about the whiskey being a breakfast whiskey, but which breakfast you put with the whiskey. So is this cornflakes or wheat bix or porridge or
jam and scones? Strawberry jam and scones. Because it's got that really red, fruity compote note. That's what I like about it. It's got that, again, comfortable note. The red wine we're using in here, beautifully balanced with the American oak, with the virgin oak, with that little touch of sherry, but just taking that orchard fruit and moving it into red berry jammy notes. That's what I love about it. Again, luscious, mouth-watering, no smoke in it at all. This has got no peat whatsoever. Our new 21, Rachel is actually integrating some peated whiskey in there, some smoke balance in that as well. So the new 21 will be a little more smoke forward, but this one has got none of that smoke in at all.
I find it, and maybe this is me getting a little bit emotional after 4 whiskeys and a little bit whimsical, but I love it when a whiskey, you can almost taste the layers and there's an element of tasting the years. Yeah. And this is a whiskey, I feel like every past you almost taste another year, another layer to be pulled off and just sort of evolves and really, really comes to the fore.
Yeah. And even Benriach always stays very bright. That's what I love about Benriach. Even, you start to broach 21, sometimes 25, 30s can start getting sometimes, flatter or duller, but Benriach always remains vibrant, always remains playful is a great word that somebody mentioned to me once about Benriach. It's got that playful element where, it does keeps on giving, but yeah, I love it. Luscious, more sumptuous fruits. The red wine interaction is great for that fruit elevation, but also people ask me, well, what red wine is it? We've got many different red wines in our warehouse. Rachel will actually, or Billy before her, will take maybe several different red wine styles to make this. But the main key that was running through them all was it was French oak. You need that little bit of French oak to give you that little bit of spice again. And maybe towards at the back of the palate, you might feel a little bit of drying. That is almost that beautiful sign of vintage, but also that little bit of French oak, which just gives you that little dry tannic note, which balances that sweet, fruit-forward nature of the spirit. So you're using, again, the oak to create these spices and maybe that dryness at the back.
With Matt Bailey commenting, roasted hazelnuts and spiced jam on the 12, which is
it's almost like Christmas.
Alan's Red Frogs.
There's a great festival in Frankfurt, so Inter Whiskey Frankfurt. And the reason that we all like going to that as ambassadors is because afterwards we go and sit and drink mulled wine out in the terraces in these bars in Frankfurt. And this reminds me of almost that warm, spiced mulled wine. It's got that beautiful, layers of that to it, which is perfect for this time of year. Well, not your time of year, summer, but more for my winter.
Well, there's not really a good time for mulled wine in Australia. It never gets quite cold enough, so it's a year-round drink for us, really.
Let's say a fruit punch then. Call it a chilled spiced fruit punch.
Well, speaking of which, I actually, when we were trying the 10, our first whiskey, it really reminded me of a mulled cider, because it had those beautiful sort of stewed and baked apples with that cinnamon flavor, that really strong, almost star anise, cinnamon, stewed apples. It really reminded me of a mulled cider in winter, really beautiful flavor.
And it's funny as you say that, Andy, because as you go through and get older in Benriach, that orchard fruit is still there in its DNA, but it does become more baked. So it is like baked apples, baked pears, so that, exactly that. That's stewed down, more cooked orchard fruit. But yeah, I love that. Fresh, vibrant, lots of lots of layers to kind of find and approach in the dram.
Awesome. Well, look, let's move on to the party piece, which we had to dig into the archives, and we created 80 packs for this tasting, and this was the bottle that limited us to 80 packs essentially, because I could only find 2 that I was willing to open up and crack open without digging into my own personal collection, which is of course our single cask, which was bottled last year. Trying to remember what year it is now. God knows what day it is, year or month it is. So our 05, I don't know. You might have something similar there. Oh, you've got a sample. Oh, well done. I think we might be drinking without
Well,
you just having to watch
it's not,
along. But
it's not actually the sample, but I've always got a deconstruction kit of different, wee samples that would go in, it's for doing deconstructions. And I did find this one. It's the closest I could find. It's actually a 12-year-old rum barrel, because this would have been an inclusion in some of that curiosities, as we said back in the day. So it's always it's a deconstruction of my 10-year-old curiosities. Beautiful though. One of my favourite casks, port cask and rum barrels are my two favourite styles, other than Madeira and Marsala. Although, saying that, I do like them all.
You've named them all, Stuart.
I can't really choose. But no, rum, look at that elevation of the fruit again. I've got a sweet tooth. I like that fruitier side of a whiskey, and you look at that rum, it just, again, elevation into that tropical note. But what I will say is, you've got to be easy with that, because sometimes that can be too one-dimensional. And I'm sure we'll realise when we taste this, you do get, again, a beautiful oak balance running through this. You can taste that lovely oak interaction. Sorry, Scott, carry on.
Oh, no. Yeah, so just wanted to, because this is not for sale. This is well and truly sold out, but just a bit of a party piece. Just to give people who haven't tried this before a bit of an idea what we're drinking. Was a 2005 distillation and bottled last year as a 14-year-old. When we were talking about it in Australia and going through it with a few people, we were expecting about 150 bottles. I think Stewie might have got his sword out there and he's cut a bit into this and brought it down to 102 bottles. That's literally all we got at 55%, a rum cask. But why we sort of did this release, and we've bottled a lot of whiskies here at the Oak Barrel over the years. We're the first in Australia to do a Glendronach back 6 or 7 years ago now. So we didn't want to just do any Benriach. We wanted to do something that sort of told the story a little bit about, the playfulness of Benriach and how well that spirit works in different types of casks. And, this rum cask was it wasn't the most balanced out of the samples we tried. It wasn't the most complete, but it was the most playful, to steal your words, Stewie. And it was the most fun. And it sort of started with this sweetness, then there's all this popping candy sort of excitement into this long finish that was actually quite shy at first pass. And certainly when the full bottles landed, it took a good half an hour when we cracked it straight off the boat pretty much until it showed itself. So wanted to go and have a look at this again. These bottles were opened 3-4 weeks ago when we put these packs together. So they've had a chance to mellow and just to really see what it's doing and how it's sort of shown. Because, one of the last single casks under the old labels. So yeah, just a bit of fun for this one.
Yeah, I think it's also good. Even a single cask like this, it's something maybe it's not your everyday drink. You'll maybe pull it out for special occasions, or you'll have it as a wee treat of a night. But I do, even myself, love going back to maybe something I've not tasted for a couple of months. It's down to half a bottle, and you see that beautiful change. You get it a lot with especially single casks as well. You'll see it mellow. You'll see something come out that maybe wasn't there at the start. So I do like going through from time to time, going through my single casks that have been maybe the ullages gone down a little bit to see how they've changed. But yeah, I do love this. The rum, as you said, rum barrels, basically they're 200 litres, so they're American standard barrel size. They are actually American barrels that have been used in the rum industry. But we did find a lot losses in these. They're Jamaican rums. They do arrive slightly drier. So we do have to dry out the hoops and get them tight to hold liquid. So not only do you get a richer absorption into that oak due to them being slightly drier in the wood itself from its journey from Jamaica. You've got to remember it's getting empty in Jamaica and taking months maybe to come to us. So the absorption is greater, but they're not the tightest. We do hammer them down. We'll still go around and bang them up when we're walking through and looking at our warehouses, but you do get a slightly higher loss on them. Now, you might think then, that they don't sound like very good casks, but they are fantastic casks because you're not only going to taste the rum, you're actually going to get that whiskey into the wood as well. And I think that's why you get so many. It's not just about the rum flavour here. You're really drawing into the oak and bringing some beautiful oak characters out as well, balancing the rum interaction and the Benriach style. So they're really good casks to work with. and even they're quite confusing actually sometimes, because we were looking at them, put the whiskey to it, nothing after 3 months, nothing after 4 months, nothing after a year. And sometimes we're also like, what's going to happen? Is there anything going to happen in these casks? But then all of a sudden, they switch on, then you start to deliver. So I was trying to kind of wonder why that was. And it goes back to the journey of that cask. The first maybe years was actually our whiskey getting into the wood before then it started releasing stuff back out again. We could have quite easily given up in these projects and say, well, these aren't good, let's just start again or do something else with it. But when you can push and push and push and push, that's where you get these beautiful things that you don't know which direction they're going to go. You just let them do their thing and they get there in the end.
It's the old 1% argument, isn't it? You know, if you absorb 1%, 1% of 1% is not that much. But after a little while, as it builds up, 1% of 20% is actually quite a lot, and sort of rules out there. And I love this. It's so playful. I don't know what you think, Andy. I don't know if you've tried this one before, but it's popping candy. It's everything I liked in weird lollies at the corner store as a kid. In a very alcoholic sort of version.
I was trying to put my finger on exactly the tasting notes that I get from it, and this is what I boil it down to: rum and raisin on shortbread. That's what I get: rum and raisin shortbread. Maybe a thin layer of chocolate on top, but all about that. Something that you bite into, and you get those sort of treacle notes, those rum notes, those raisins, and you've got that bread. That sort of buttered bread taste to it as well. It's beautiful, beautiful whiskey.
The palate actually is very similar to how I remember it, but I think the nose is a lot better. I think it's far more expressive now than it was, which is just interesting from my point of view. A very important comment coming through from Karina says, is that a train on the label? And unfortunately not, Karina. It does look like a train there, but as we zoom in, it's actually a distillery with barrels in the front. But I can see how you might have made that jump to conclusion there. And because it is true that if you put trains on the label of a whiskey, it automatically makes the whiskey taste better.
Yeah, but I'll tell you the funny thing about that. See, when I used to sit beside the girl who developed this label, and she thought, that's a picture of our floor maltings, up the lane of the floor maltings. That's where we keep the barrels before they go into the film store. So that was basically the picture of the barrels outside the floor maltings. As soon as I looked at it, and I thought, did you mean this to look like a train? And she said, no. And goes, well, it looks like a train to me. But the more funny thing is, the reason I thought she did do it deliberately is because that is actually an old train line, where that point between the distillery and the floor maltings is an old train line that used to link Benriach, Longmorn, Glenlossie.
It's the old Strathbay Railway, isn't it?
Yeah. So it was it was quite unusual, quite funny that, but purely coincidental.
Perfect barrel track, right there. No construction needed.
Yeah. Except when a train is coming the other direction.
Wouldn't be ideal. Very true.
Look, Stewie, we know you've got a whole day of work in front of you, and whereas we, particularly us in Sydney and other parts of the world of Australia that aren't Melbourne, have only bars to keep us busy for the rest. So we asked you for an hour, and you've been very generous in giving a little bit more over and above. So thank you so much. These last two whiskies are a bit of a privilege, a little bit of a party, but I think the focus tonight was on those three new releases. And what a triumph for whiskey drinkers. I'm a consumer first and foremost, as we all are, and whiskey's bloody expensive to have whiskies that you really like and enjoy, and to have these sorts of whiskies available in that $70 to $90 price bracket, particularly in Australia, is great. I don't know what they're going for overseas. So congratulations. I know you're the you get to be the face, the very pretty head and front of the brand that takes all the glory. But please pass on all our congratulations and thanks to the whole team working there. Rachel and all the people working alongside her.
Yeah, we're really enjoying it. As I say, we're all out in force now, and it's great. Almost to have a second wave of launching this in front of the public, and that's what we miss, I suppose, by doing these. The personal contact that we can go for a whiskey afterwards. So I hope to be with you guys as soon as I can. So we'll need to do that little bar crawl we talked about earlier, and we can revisit where I was taken out of back in March 2000 and what was it, 2020?
I can tell you the exact date. It was Friday the 13th, March
Yeah,
2020.
that's great.
Because you had done a tasting on Thursday the 12th here at the Oak Barrel, and then we had the boys from Adelphi here afterwards, and it was Friday the 13th, and it was just when it was starting to bubble over. And I have, you know how you sign the board? They actually wrote COVID-19 Friday 13th and drew some ghouls and things on it. So I will never, ever forget that day, because the world, as we were talking about just before, imploded pretty soon afterwards. So, the bars are still waiting for you to come back. As I say, they still ask about you. Andy, I think you can attest to that. It was like, when's every bartender you ask for? Oh, yeah, Andy's nice, but when's Stewie coming back? When's Stewie coming back?
Absolutely. There's certainly a magnetism and hilarity that you bring. Remembering everyone's names will always blow my mind. The fact that you can rock in, and whether you do a few clicks and a few slaps, you'll always remember every person's name, and it always blew my mind. But yeah, massive thank you, Stewart. For you to give up this time for us and the additional minutes as well, just to really talk about these fantastic new whiskies. I can't wait to see them on back bars. As a set, we didn't really touch on this, but they look so beautiful together as a range. With the new labels, they really look great together. And of course, Scott, thank you so much for hosting and having us on board for all the viewers as well. The range is available, and you're doing 24 hours of free delivery for the Benriach series, which is fantastic for anyone to jump on board.
Yeah, and look, thanks everyone, and thanks for the team at Brown-Forman Australia to making this happen. Now, we're lucky enough to be the first of this, but this is not a hard sell. These releases are going to start filtering out to bars and independent bottle stores all around the country that you can get on. So you don't need to necessarily grab it off us. Go and support your local bar. Go and support your local bottle store. It's those sort of people like the great team I work with here at the Oak Barrel that keep these brands sort of kicking along and keep this discovery happening, and what makes the Australian industry and the Australian whiskey community such a vibrant thing to be part of. So thank you everyone for listening in on the chat, and for those of you who I know emailed me today to say you're going to watch it back later. By now I would have emailed you the link to this recording, and you'll be able to drink along. But thank you everyone. We will all be in the same room sooner rather than later, I hope.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. And we'll see you soon.
Cheers.
Slanja.
Here's luck.